Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 2:00 and we are resumed. A couple of housekeeping matters. I've appreciated the blast of cold air. It's perked me up no end, but do you think we want it running at this level all afternoon? I'm noticing that some of us might be a little bit chilly.
Sorry, that was my fault.
Well, I'm using my coat as a blanket right now, so I'd appreciate a little more warmth.
Do you think we could?
Shall I turn it up to 22 again? It was at 22. I put it down to 20. Shall I go in between and say 21 or?
That sounds a marvellous compromise.
What I will ask is, I know there's a variety, it appears, of base temperatures on this side of the room. If people do get too warm, may they be permitted to remove their jackets?
Oh gosh, of course, I should have said you don't have to wear your jackets for my inquiries at all. No. Right, 23 in shorts tomorrow. So that's that matter. Bat note.
I'm going to bat that one over to Muller.
Our ecologist, I think, has been unavailable this morning, but he's looking at it. He was looking at it about half an hour ago, and so is in the process of going through it, and hopes to get back to the appellant later today.
Marvellous, thank you. And is the same person looking at our mystery predator?
Yes, on that, I don't know what would help you most in terms of we know what is being referred to. I mean, do you want a note on that, and what would help you most about how we deal with that?
What would help me is a note from the part, just a very short, just one paragraph, to cover what it is. Now, we can't put that into the core document library, but you can give me a note to tell me that the parties have reviewed this and whether or not there is an issue at all. And maybe there isn't.
Yes.
What do we think?
No, that sounds like a very sensible approach. I haven't had an opportunity to speak to my ecologist about it. Now I know the species. That's something I would like to raise with them, just to make sure that it's been covered to the extent that it's necessary to do so. So I think the council will do the same. And as you say, Madam will provide you with a paragraph letting you know what the position is.
Okay, thank you. So is there any other housekeeping that we need to attend to? Nope. Okay, marvellous. Mr. Lever, you seem a long way away. Are you happy down there?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'll turn my microphone on when I speak as well.
Right then, so for the benefit of members of the public, we are now going to have the landscape round table. So for this, we're going to have a discussion about the issues of concern, and I will lead that. For the benefit of the landscape architects who are used to following very nice and neat and tidy methodologies in Glivia 3, etc., I'll give you a warning that my brain will go this way and that, but don't be put off. It's not a strategy, it's just how I will be flitting around it. So take your time to answer things and don't be put off. I'm not clever enough to be doing any games. Okay, so I got the case officer to send out a note this morning. Did you both get a copy of that?
Yes, I've received that, Madam.
Okay, good. And then we also have a statement of common ground for landscape matters, of which I understand there is a printed and stapled copy for me.
Printed and stapled.
That's marvellous. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll use the two to guide us through the session. Just to warm us up, some small details which I know you'll both like. So I just want to be clear about, firstly, we had some revisions to the swept path drawings as they related to the access from the B road. And so I want, if the appellant would lead on just explaining to me whether or not there are any implications from those revisions for the work that you've done in looking at that access in that area, and then perhaps Mr. Lever can respond if needed be.
Yes, ma'am, we'll just get up the relevant documents.
So that was the,
What date is that?
yeah, I'm just looking at that. That's 11/23. And then I'm just going to confirm that chronology with the client, who is, I believe, out sourcing stationery. So if we can come back to that one, I'd be very grateful, and sorry to sort of take you out of order.
No, it's fine. My order is flexible. Perhaps then if we, whilst we're looking at that, if we flit across to the access, to the other access off the lane, is there still remaining confusion over the extent of works, or are you both now agreed regarding levels and impacts, etc.?
We're agreed that there's no tree removal required on the access off sector lane, which I think was the issue that was between us.
And also there would be no change in levels as well. Is that correct? Yeah.
Okay, then on the ZTV work that was done, just again a point of clarification for me, where the height of the transmission points that have been used?
Yes, the heights are have been modelled at, I think, 8 metres. So it's slightly above the 7.5 just because of the increments of what we can model.
So on the drawings where it's at the substation, because I think you did, or the previous consultants did a combined ZTV, didn't they? They modelled two heights, I think. We had 4 metres, which is representative of the height of the acoustic fencing.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and then there was another modelling. Does it say substation?
That's correct, yes.
Is that what is Is that what's modelled on an 8-metre transmission?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Do we have a picture of the tallest part of the structure that you could take me to show me what is at 7.5 metres?
There is a plan, an elevation that we can just find for you.
So you should have the substation layout revision 2.
I do indeed have substation layout revision 02, and I'm looking at a cross-section through the development, and I can see a transformer unit up to 7.5 metres, and then the next item is a high-level disconnector, which is somewhat below that.
Yes, that's correct, ma'am.
And given that on the left-hand side it shows a track of a 4.5 metres width, I'm understanding this to show me that the transformer might be roughly 3 to 4 metres maximum across, something like that.
That looks, yes, about right.
Okay, so then when we say in the evidence, I think you're both generally agreed that the extent of effects would extend between 0.5 and 1 kilometres. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right, madam.
And is that the result of the 7.5 metre high tower?
Sorry. I mean, it is a combination of the two. If you go to figure 9 of which is Appendix 1 or Appendix A of the LVA, CD 1.65. That's what's called a screened ZTV, which takes account of intervening vegetation in terms of the zone of theoretical visibility. I mean, as you know, normally good practice is you have a ZTV which is a bare ground model, which is also included in the LVA. But this is quite helpful because what this shows is the area sort of to the immediately around the site where there is theoretical visibility both of the acoustic fence and of the transformer, and those are the areas I think where there's going to be visibility really. And and there's no argument about, woodland getting in the way of that because that's already been screened out. So that's quite helpful in terms of the extent, certainly the extent of visibility.
Also, just to clarify, the overlapping circles there basically explain that the blue is the acoustic fence, so that is where you would see the acoustic fence in isolation predicted. The substation is a yellow, so typically, because of its location further north, you're generally seeing pockets of additional visibility of the substation in its own right. And then the green is where you would see potentially both aspects of the development together.
And so when we're outside of the circle there, we're beyond, is that a 1 kilometre?
That's 3 kilometres.
That's
ma'am.
3 kilometres. Okay, right. Okay, so that's why, Mr. Levy, you're saying to me you were indicating drawing your finger quite close around, because the picture that I'm looking at is covering 3 kilometres.
Yes, that is not, it's not covering 3 kilometres. I mean, there'll be, there's potential for visibility beyond a kilometre, but I think we've agreed that those effects are not really likely to be material.
Okay, so then within our 0.5 to 1 kilometre area, looking at the effects that you disagree on, so this might be useful to use the statement of common ground, which I've already lost. No, I've got it. Okay, so when we turn to section 3 and the matters in dispute, I think it gives me 5 subheadings for the main areas of concern. But when I read the evidence, am I right to understand that the appellant now agrees that the effects at the site level, within the site itself, to landscape character are higher than what the original LVA said?
That's correct, ma'am. I believe them to be adjusted accordingly within the confines of the field of the BES compound, I've been calling it, or main site.
And what level did you rate them at then?
I rated that at moderate to major effects.
And sorry, you might have just told me, that is within just the site?
Yes, that's correct. It's just the main site within the...
Do you want to get a plan out?
Yes. Draw your attention to figure 15, which is
Is it the
CD. It's the landscape strategy. Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's worth just drawing out that the main site is the red line boundary, which encompasses the actual compound and then the access tracks to the north and south and the site access to the south. But there's obviously quite a difference in scale between the main compound development, which I've been calling the main site, or the BESS compound, and then the access tracks to the north and south and the site access as well. So when I talk about the moderate major effects, I'm meaning very much within that field.
So you're specifically excluding the access points
From that
there.
major moderate effect, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. I mean, we surprisingly, I assessed a moderate adverse effect. I took into account the access tracks as well. Landscape visual impact assessment is always a matter of judgment, and you know, there's not a massive measure between a high level of moderate and perhaps a low level of major moderate adverse. But the truth of the matter is that the main site will be completely altered, substantially altered by the development, and the access tracks will bring about quite a big change to what are currently agricultural fields where they run through. And the one to the B3165, of course, subdivides that field. I also took into account the effect on the permissive path, which runs along to the west of the main site, and was agreed, as I understand it, as part of the planning consent for the Beaver Grange solar farm. And that's in Appendix 1 of my proof of evidence, the plan for that. And it's shown on this landscape and ecological mitigation plan, as well as an orange dotted line just outside the site.
When you say you took that into account there as a landscape effect, or because I recall reading about the effect on receptors on the path.
As a visual effect, but also that surrounding part of the site, there's not much protection between that and the area of landscape next door to it. There's an existing hedge that it doesn't appear that anything is being done to improve that. And at the moment it's quite gappy. I must admit, I'm not clear whose ownership that hedge lies in, whether it's the appellants or the owners of the adjacent site.
I can't answer the ownership of that, but just to raise a couple of points, I think it's worth, the reason I separated out the impacts on the actual site itself and the wider site, I think it's important because there's quite a difference in scale of effect and susceptibility of a landscape receptor to a BES compound, which is effectively removing the open to closed space. It's changing that characteristic of that field from a grazed pasture to an enclosed compound with obviously cabinets in it, BESS cabinets, and also electricity transmission infrastructure. But for the access tracks and for the entrance, the level of change is far less. So I didn't want to dilute an assessment to come out to an automatic level of moderate across it, because I think that underplays effects on site, but perhaps overplays effects on that surrounding landscape. Because you could also argue that access tracks and openings are, a fact of, not a fact, but they are in an agricultural working landscape. There are some existing tracks in the vicinity of this as well. So I felt it was important to separate out those particular aspects of effect to make sure we knew what we were dealing with.
I think on your site visits, madam, there's a number of energy infrastructure projects around here, and you'll be able to see the nature of these access tracks. There's an access track into the solar farm on Sector Lane just a bit further to the west, and I think from my experience, this sort of access track has a different, almost more engineered quality to it than something that's maybe a farm access track that provides access to a field or to a series of fields, for agricultural work. But I think we perhaps on the site visits, we can take you to one or two of these tracks, and you can get a flavour of the difference of a character of this. I think. I think this will have an effect on the landscape that will be a bit, will jar a bit from what one would expect from an agricultural access track.
I did pick that up in reading between the various evidence. Am I right in understanding that that the appellant argues that the construction of the tracks is not substantial? Or?
I don't think we used that term, ma'am, but we didn't, there's going to be no curbs. It's not going to be a curbed or a metalled surface, which I mean by that a sealed surface. So it will be made of constructed rock that will be compacted to a running course to allow the construction to happen. But in time, with relatively less use, the verges will start to green up over time, but we obviously haven't assessed that because that's something that we can't give any certainty to. But we wanted it to be clear that it's not a solid paved surface, it's not bitumen or concrete, it's a crushed stone surface without curbing.
We accept it's not going to be a tarmac or concrete surface. It'll be a stone surface, a rolled stone surface. I'm assuming rolled.
Okay, thank you for that. Just jumping back, do you know yet whether or not the work that you did was on the basis of the latest sweat path analysis? Do we have that chronology?
Yes, I'm instructed that originally the operational access was to come off the B road and the emergency access was to come off Stanmore Lane, but at the request of the landscape officer, those two things were switched. And then the assessments were undertaken in light of those amended proposals.
Yes, so we confirmed that the landscape and visual appraisal took into account those changes in terms of the access to the north and the access to the south.
Are you happy with that, Mr. Lever?
Yeah,
Is that...
Yes, I carried out my appraisal, based on that.
that clears up my questions about those drawings. Thank you very much. So looking at then the policy designations and landscape character. So we've talked about the physicality of the site and the access. And then in the policy designations, we have the Devon character area, the Wootton Hills. Have I said that correctly? Good. So we have the Wootton Hills, and then the effects that you say the proposal will have on that character area. Are you in agreement on in that character area or not?
Well, the point that the LVA made was that they considered all the ranges. There's quite a lot of landscape characterisation going on in this area, at different levels, different scales, different reasons. And as part of the LVA approach, they actually, we scoped out assessment on the national and the sort of regional character areas as much as they pertain to underpinning that in favour of using the local. So there wasn't a sort of formal appraisal of effect against those, because it was felt that that would actually, it could have the effect of misrepresenting, you know, you could say, well, that effect against those characters could potentially dilute the level of effects. And in line with GLVIA, they recommend using the smaller scale assessments, so the regional, national, to perhaps provide context, but local is better because for a start you're dealing with more readily the types of effects that might be might influence the siting and design.
Thank you. And so at the local area, the character area and the landscape typology that we have are what?
Well, it's interesting because...
Should we go to the core documents?
Yes,
Is that
sorry.
best? Yeah.
Yes, if we go to the core documents, and I'm not sure if people can hold these two plans side by side, but I have, it's core document 164, and I have figure 2, which is topography, beside figure 5, which is the landscape character plan. And then there's a topography plan, which is figure 2, which is, if you can put them side by side, it's quite helpful.
Okay, so for the benefit of people watching, I've been taken to the landscape character drawing and the topography drawing in the LVA. Thank you.
That's correct, ma'am. And first of all, I'd like to talk a bit about the figure 2, the topography. And I think early on in the proof when I was working on this, it's quite interesting how fundamental the landscape character of this upland plateau is really quite strong and contributes to the character and informs the siting and design of the development. Now, to go back to the point about the different levels of characterisation, at the regional level, you have to the north, if we go to then the character figure 5, north of the Dorset administrative boundary, you've got the Wootton Hills landscape character area, which is in Devon, and that is bounded by the black line between the sort of pink and the kind of beige colour. So you go from Axe Valley to Wootton Hills character areas. And then they've taken that a further level of assessment to county level, and they talk about character types. So within that, you have these quite interesting bands which really follow the landform quite strongly. You have the upland plateau, which is the sort of blue colour in a sort of horseshoe, and then you have these lobes extending out. And almost in a sort of rainbow effect, you then have the steep wooded scarp slopes running to the north of that. And then again to the north of that, you have the upper farmland and wooded valley slopes. And then you go down into the sort of rolling farmland. So in a way, you almost have this sort of stratification of landscape character to the north side. Obviously, to the south side, you don't have that same scale of assessment. You have very much the regional Wootton Hills character, and so character area. And so I felt when I came into this, I think it's useful rather than to get hung up on changes in, I think, sorry, restart myself. It's interesting because all these character types to the north are defined by a change or a transition in landscape character. So they go from a character type or a character area, and that is very much landscape-led. It's this appraisal of landscape character to reach that judgment that there's a transition in character. Along this boundary, that change from different scales and different characters is very much led in places by an administrative boundary, which in some places might denote a change in landscape character, but might not. And my argument along this boundary between Dorset and Devon, and I'm not talking about value or anything, I'm talking purely in terms of landscape character, is that if you notice the topography against the landscape character map, the upland plan plateau, you know, it's almost picking out this sort of curve of upland plateau, the ridgeline, and these lobes of character. So I would argue that that type of character actually extends southwards and into the Dorset characterisation. So it's talking about key characteristics and not looking at character type boundaries. And this is very much what I observed on site when I was doing my work. And actually very usefully in the drone view that we got this morning from the interested parties, very clearly shows that sort of bleeding of landscape character across the B Road and down into the southern edge of the into Dorset and that edge. So it's not about, I'm not about trying to designate or questioning that. It's more about looking at landscape character types and key characteristics and how they might inform the design. So it's talking about susceptibility. So I think it's quite fundamental in looking at key characteristics per se, and that's also reinforced by the locational guidance in the Devon, what's it called? The Devon Local Policy Group, Advice Note 2, and they talk more so in terms of characteristics and key characteristics, and stay away from talking about character types and character areas.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. That's true in terms of the landscape character types, and this is an area, particularly to the north of the site, where you can see those changes happening. I think one of the things that the Devon character areas, the landscape character areas, does those areas are if you like, at a larger scale and contain different character types. So they are So the way that the landscape is appreciated by people is probably in this area looking at the characteristics of the character area. So there's a combination of there's a movement from the valley bottom up the valley sides and the wooded valley sides and up over onto that plateau. But I agree that you know, what one needs to do is to look at the characteristics of the landscape. But I'd ask that you don't ignore the listed characteristics of the character area, because some of those are relevant to this and to the way that this landscape is appreciated. I'd also say that you know, with taking all of that into account, the LVA still assess that the local landscape, the character type, had a medium to high sensitivity to change of the type that's being proposed. There. I shall have to go back to the so appendix of C of the LVIA has got a handy table in the back where it goes through the magnet. Sorry. Okay, so page 12, sort of table 3 within that appendix, for the character type, is suggesting a medium to high sensitivity, a slight magnitude of change, and a minor to moderate adverse effect.
So, Mr. Levy, you said that it's important to look at the key characteristics. And am I right in reading your evidence that some of the key characteristics that you pull out are rurality and tranquility, field pattern and hedgerows and trees?
Yes, that's right. There's, I mean, this is still this landscape has still got a very rural quality, in spite of the large areas of solar PV that have been put in. I mean, solar PV keeps the land cover the same. You know, still grass. The fencing that goes around it tends to be a bit like deer fencing. It's got a sort of rural quality to it, unlike the sort of security fencing that's proposed for the BESS. And as a result of that, you know, once you start to get a little bit away from the main road, there's still a strong sense of remoteness and tranquility. The pattern of woodland, the hedgerows, the narrow lanes, I think all contribute to that, to a sense of a landscape that's got a sort of rich time depth, and it does feel remote, and you soon lose the impact of the main road as you move away from it.
Which main road do you mean?
Sorry, the B3165. Apologies.
I think this is a point that maybe we agree to disagree on. I feel that yes, I certainly, you can recognise that there is very strong, rural character by virtue of the field pattern and the open field. It is also the context of solar farm, and it is development, and also solar farm development crosses several fields. Typically, it's not just confined to one field. So whilst the hedgerows are kept between it, the actual surface area of solar farms is typically greater than the main changes introduced by the proposed BESS compound. Along the side of the B road and up and into the site, by virtue of that sort of broad landform going up onto the plateau, the sound of the B road does carry up onto that plateau. I grant you that once over the other side, when you're dropping down onto sector lane, given the fact that it's a much narrower lane, and it's, you've got hedgerows, so you do have to drive slower whether you want to or not. And it does have, I would say, aspects of tranquility to it. It's more peaceful. Whereas I feel quite strongly that along the south side, along the B road, the qualities of tranquility are very weakened, especially in relation to, you have to remember again that the landscape character areas are quite large areas, and there will be areas within that have a much greater tranquility, and I would argue that area along the B road, it's by virtue of a combination of things. It's one of the few sort of straighter sections of that road, and cars do go along it quite fast, and it's that noise does carry up onto the site. And remoteness, it's interesting, in beyond the technical advice note from the Landscape Institute, which again I'm not prepared. What's the core document number?
It's 10.2.
10.2, and it's really helpful. They've got it's about assessing value beyond a designated landscape, but it's got some very useful criteria to understand what does distinctiveness mean, what does tranquility mean, what does remoteness mean. And one of the issues about remoteness that you have to take into account is proximity to existing roads. And this is on a B road, there's quite a network of rural roads. So just purely in terms of remoteness, I think there are other places where that quality and characteristic are far better expressed than in the vicinity of that B road. You feel that you're in a rural landscape, but it is a managed working landscape.
Yes, I mean it's not the most tranquil part of the character area or the character type, but I mean it's got to be seen in the context of that area, and this is by and large a settled landscape. There are lanes and roads, farms, small settlements throughout the landscape. I mean it's not when the work was done on the character assessments and after due consideration, the consideration was that there were high levels of tranquility and remoteness. It was taking into account the fact that this is a working farmed landscape with farms, with lanes, with tractors, with roads running through it, and the B3165 is maybe not the most tranquil part of it, but none of it. There's nowhere where you get a complete absence of the sense of human intervention within this landscape.
I think we're not talking about human intervention per se, ma'am. I think, yesterday when I was driving further south into the national landscape, and even to the area to the north, you're on these winding roads that, even though you're on a road, you do feel there's those elements of tranquility and remoteness, because you're on sometimes I did wonder if I was actually on somebody's private road to their house, because the road had narrowed to the point that the hedgerows were either side and you had vegetation appearing down the middle of the road itself. So those, you know, those aspects of remoteness, you know, were present, even though you were on what is all, to an extent and purposes, a public road. So it's about, you know, it's about variation in character areas.
Apologies. Is there anything else that either of you want to add about the typicality of the site and the locality to the character areas and typologies?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that, well, and it's picked up in my rebuttal and Ms. Fletcher's work as well, that there is a similarity both sides of the boundaries of the national landscape, but I'm guessing we're coming on to the national landscape. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so just before we flit across the road into the national landscape, or we don't flit across the road, do we? It's flitted. Mr. Lever, in your evidence, you talk about the trees, the characteristics. I think you mentioned particularly about beech trees being a particular feature in the tree-lined.
That's one of the characteristics that's noted. Yes, you know, admitted these are not all beech trees. I think there's some beech further down, but the section of B3165 is a tree-lined road that's characteristic of the landscape locally.
You're ahead of me, because I was just about to take you in my mind. I'm travelling south to north up the lane, the road, the B road, and I observed quite a lot of the beech trees. In fact, in some places I thought I saw double planted rows as well, or maybe it could be grown out hedgerow, but there were quite a lot of distinctive beech trees coming up. But then we get to the site and I noticed it was quite different. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, it is. I mean, there are trees along that boundary. There's obviously opportunities for more tree planting along that boundary, but they're not beech on there. It hasn't got the same character as the road further south.
And then I was doing a little bit of looking between the hedgerows and snooping into the site and things, and I would like to know your opinion on whether or not you think the field behind has been amalgamated, because I thought I could see on the ground the line of an old hedgerow, which appeared to my mind, and perhaps something that we'll have a look at on the site, but it appeared as though it might have been the line of the route further south that would have continued further north and appears to have gone, just looking at the ground. But it was foggy and I could be and I could be seeing ghosts and all sorts of things, couldn't I? So when you've been on the site, have you noticed, have you felt that, have you observed that at all, that there might have been some field amalgamation there?
I must admit, I haven't noticed it, but it wouldn't be surprising. It's not included in the evidence at all, but I know that looking at the Devon historic landscape characterisation, this is an area where there has been some historic hedgerow loss, and these, you know, these medium-sized fields sometimes will be made up of smaller fields where a hedge has been taken away. I'd be surprised if there was an old hedge boundary if it runs along the line of the proposed hedge boundary next to the proposed access road from the BRE 3165. There's a gate halfway through the hedge in that bottom field, and I'd have thought it more likely that it would be round there somewhere. But we could have a look on site.
Yeah, we'll be a little bit supposing and things, won't we, this afternoon? But if we do have a look at that on site, that would be helpful. Ms. Fletcher, do you have anything to?
No, I was actually, it was interesting you raising this, because I was talking through with colleagues about the issue about, I think it's one of the points you raise about the original historical boundary. And it's not part of the proof, but I looked into some of the historical mapping, and there does seem to be some compartmentalisation of the fields that have since maybe increased, although it looks like for the actual site itself, the two fields, the one next to the B road and then the main site field, are as they were originally, the same size, although there does seem to be, as you say, Peter, potentially a field boundary coming up from that gate. So that would have originally been two fields, and now it's sort of one long field, but the site field itself. But interestingly, to the north of Sector Lane, that's been compartmentalised as well.
Not
Yes.
this one. Yeah, it is in the evidence. It's in the heritage assessment,
Ah, right.
core document 1.33. There's a map progression.
Heritage Assessment, core document 1.33.
Sorry.
I'll have a look at core document 1.33 before we go to site. Mr. Lever, is the line, is it representative of an administrative line rather than?
So this is the boundary to the national landscape. I'm not at all clear. I've had a look through the Dorset National Landscape website. I couldn't find anything. I can find no evidence that, with all the other changes that have been happening with National Landscape recently, there's no evidence they've taken the opportunity to seek to change the boundary, to do a boundary review. I think sort of pertinent to this inquiry, I think the LVA did take account of this and did describe it as a historic anomaly in their assessment. So it's, you know, that sense of it feeling as though perhaps it's on the wrong side of the road was taken into account in the assessment that was done as part of the original LVA.
So do you think it was on the wrong side of the road?
Well, I mean, there's the boundary's the boundary, and I'm not in the I really am not in the game of trying to second guess national landscape boundaries. I mean, there's not a distinctive line on the ground that shows a complete difference in landscape character between one side of the road and the other. I mean, it could have been drawn through the top of the plateau and would be running sort of right through the site, or it could have been drawn along the road. But there's not that really dramatic change in landscape character. So I mean, a lot of the landscape on the Devon side, if you like, it's got similar characteristics to the landscape on the national landscape side of the boundary.
Although I was hearing this morning from an interested party who was saying about the character of the valley landscape. Is that further down then?
Helpfully, on the Dorset side, there's also Wootton Hills landscape character area, and that includes description of the the sort of pasture areas on the upper slopes and the flatter land, and the steep wooded valleys. I mean, that's not that different to the north-facing pasture on the upper valleys and steep wooded valleys on the Devon side, but of course that's not within the national landscape. Some of this, yes, I mean, I think as I was saying before, ma'am, that you know, it's how people appreciate the landscape, and there are those valleys, but one of the things that makes those valleys special is the contrast between the seclusion and containment within those valleys and the openness once you get up onto the upper, the less well-treed upper slopes and the plateaus.
I would agree to some extent that, yes, it's about those transitions, but I think, you know, if you're talking about some of the key characteristics of and the special qualities of the national landscape, you know, it really does talk about that combination, but tends to very much labour the point about it's the more intimate, steeper slopes down into the valley that are particularly distinctive and integral to the appreciation of that landscape. They do mention that, yes, transitions in character are part of that, but by that time you are on the edge of the park, and when you're on that edge, I agree. I think that, you know, landscape is very much about people's response to place, and particularly when you're talking about qualities of landscape, it's people's perception and response to that. And when I was in that area, the main appreciation of that is when you're looking south and into the national landscape from those sort of panoramic edges south, rather than north into the actual landscape of the proposed site.
Yes, thanks. CD 10.12 is the Dorset National Landscape Management Plan, and in their statement of significance, which is section 5, it starts on page 16, page 17 in a PDF, but 16 in paper. That talks about the first of the special qualities being a contrast and diversity, a microcosm of England's finest landscapes. And that talks very much about this being a collection of different landscapes and about the transitions between component landscapes. And, you know, taking that into account, I mean, those upper slopes and that plateau are, whether they're, you know, within the national landscape or outside the national landscape, I mean, they're part of the setting of that national landscape, and they're important to it because of that transition and that mosaic and that sort of complexity of different types of field and of landscape.
Just following on from that, ma'am. Sorry, too enthusiastic. So. Sorry about that, ma'am. Yeah, in terms of the contrast and diversity, you know, it does talk about that transition into the sort of ridge tops, but it also mentions that these areas of higher ground allow the observer uninterrupted panoramic views to appreciate that complex pattern. And you very much do see that along that boundary edge. But that diversity is very much in views to the south. And, you know, a lot of this is picked up in my proof of evidence, where I looked at the qualities and the special qualities and how you appreciate them. And so, again, it's the sort of, you know, the Dorset National Landscape Management Plan and the discussion of characteristics and defined qualities are great. And but for me, it's a sort of starting point to actually ascertain how they are appreciated on site. And along that area of landscape along the boundary, I feel that those are perhaps less representative than within the wider part of the national landscape immediately to the south once you drop off that plateau edge.
Does this then take us to one of your areas of disagreement over the weight to be attached, or the value that you attach to the national landscape designation in this area?
I think we both agree on the high value of the national landscape. It's a susceptibility of the national landscape to change that we disagree on.
Yes, that's the case. The LVA again in that Appendix C talked about the considerations that it had, or the authors of that had when they were looking at susceptibility, and they were looking at issues like land cover and landform and scenic quality, and I agree with them that the national landscape in this area, because it forms a skyline to the national landscape, and because it's important in the setting of the national landscape, particularly in this area as it drops steeply away, that it does have a high susceptibility to development of this sort that may appear on that skyline, or where access tracks cut through hedgerows into this skyline.
I think just picking up that latter point, I to an extent I agree that I think that wider landscape north of the national landscape running up to the ridgeline does contribute to a setting, but it's not an open skyline, it's a wooded skyline. And so, and you read that as part of the wider wooded skyline along that ridge. So it's not, it's part of that wider undifferentiated skyline in the views in particular from within the designated landscape northwards. And so that was one point, but I think the where we disagree on, well, it's not a huge disagreement, but it is a more nuanced approach to susceptibility of the landscape. For a start, we have to remember it's coming back to that point of what part of the site are we considering in the national landscape, and it's the access track and the new entrance, removal of some a section of hedgerow and an access track going from that. And at that point, it's the susceptibility, I think, is lower because we are on an area where there are other accesses off that B road. And also this ties into GLVIA, which is CD 10.1, and there's two paragraphs in particular that talk about susceptibility that are very helpful, that 5.46 and 5.47, and effectively it talks about that it's possible for internationally, nationally or locally important landscape to have relatively low susceptibility to change resulting from the particular type of development in question by virtue of both the characteristics of the landscape and the nature of the proposal. And so when I came into this, I wanted to understand a bit more about the assessment of moderate effects, because that to me seemed quite a high level of effect. And initially it was talking about, well, that was more related to the sensitivity of the receptor. And then looking in a bit more detail, the susceptibility and the value were both high. But I felt that on balance, the susceptibility would be lower because it's not the BES site that we're considering in that landscape. It's the access track and the entrance. And then there's the effect on the setting, which has to be taken into account. But again, through the work, that was a far less extent of effect.
Yes, but what we're talking about here is the susceptibility of the national landscape, not the site. So it's the national landscape itself, and that, I mean, if the area around this were I don't, tall buildings, or lots of industrial development, or hundreds of power lines, and that would reduce the susceptibility to a further development within that setting. But I mean, that isn't that's not what we've got in this area. And there are access tracks, accesses off the road, and there are solar farms. But I mean, they are quite well hidden. I mean, sometimes it's very difficult to draw the line between making a judgment on susceptibility, which is how careful have I got to be in designing this and designing in mitigation, and magnitude of change, which is what you actually do. If you've got somewhere that's a high susceptibility, what you actually do to address that. And I mean, it's up for you to decide, madam. But that's something that might be worth just thinking about. That it's that the susceptibility of the national landscape is about how open it is to being changed, not what's being done in this particular development.
The susceptibility of the receptor you're looking at.
Yeah, it's
accommodate the development proposed without undue consequences.
Yeah, it's about we're talking about the susceptibility of that particular area within the study area, and I think susceptibility is actually really important because, for example, if it was a designed landscape within a national landscape, for example, you could say, well, we're going to plant some really specimen giant Wellingtonia, and that would actually be, quite appropriate in that area. But in wider areas, the susceptibility would actually be a lot higher because it's not a native species, it's not particularly characteristic. And so I think this is where it's important to consider what aspect of the site we're talking about and the susceptibility of those particular characteristics, which I feel don't. There are the characteristics which are susceptible to change, such as the smaller scale field pattern, the steep slopes, those intimacy and tranquility and remoteness aren't on that area of the national landscape, and therefore the susceptibility of the development to that is lower, because by virtue of the fact that by virtue of the fact that I feel that those characteristics aren't present.
I fear I run the risk of repeating myself, madam, so maybe I should stop if you've noted everything I was going to say on that.
We've talked about hedgerows, field patterns, rurality and tranquility. Is there anything else on those characteristics that you feel you need to add?
No, only to draw attention to that western hedge once again, that appears to be a bit of an anomaly, that there's no mitigation proposed along that edge next to the permissive path.
Good point, Mr. Lever. Thank you for reminding me about that. Mr. Fletcher, what do you say on that?
I'd just like to explain that when the landscape and visual appraisal was done, that solar farm wasn't there, so that permissive path wasn't there, hence it wasn't assessed in the original appraisal. Reassessment was in relation to issues raised by the council, in particular the change in accesses and that particular aspect views from the permissive path. I think given the context of the path and the fact that it was on the edge of the solar farm, wasn't raised by the council, and therefore that wasn't, they didn't ask for assessment, so that wasn't carried out. So I think that the hedgerow seems relatively intact. It's about, I reckon it's about 2 metres high, roughly. I think I was sort of trying to work off from my height. And so it sort of seams the screen lower sections, but there's a point where you hit the two or three existing overhead wooden poles, and for that reason, that part of the hedge has to be clipped down higher up on the plateau next to the proposed development site. If you go to, I'm drowning in paperwork.
I've got the indicative landscape and ecological.
Yeah, great.
mitigation.
So if you go to the,
Hold it up so she can see.
yeah, if you go to this top corner here,
Yeah.
you can actually see the line of the overhead line running to the northeast. And at that juncture there, there's 2 or 3 wooden, I'm not sure the technical term, I think they're like deconnectors, I think. So they go underground at that point. And so there's actually a couple of places where the hedgerow has been reduced in height there. And again, there's a sort of quite a pronounced gap along the sector road hedge as well that's had to take into account the way leave for that overhead line.
Yes, and there's and obviously from that path, that the tallest elements of the BESS are there. So that's where the transformer is, and then the 7.5 metre high transformer tower and everything. And there's no acoustic fence around that, so you'd get a full view of the security fence through the transformer compound and through to the battery containers. I mean, again, it's much easier to see on screen than on the plan. But in the if you like, the southern corner of that edge, there appears to be an electricity cable coming out of the solar farm to the south, which would really limit any. I mean, it's probably got easements and all sorts of stuff around it, but that would limit any planting work that you could do to mitigate that along that edge.
Sorry, just out of interest, I did ask the question of colleagues how high those wooden poles are, just for an idea of verticality. And I understand they're sort of usually between 8 and 9 metres tall. So I'm not saying that they're in any way the same as a substation, but it's just useful for a sort of vertical scale reference.
But they're not 4 metres wide, so.
I didn't say that, I was talking purely in terms of height.
Okay. Right. So next on my list, I've got consideration of lighting effects. What lighting did you take into consideration when you were undertaking your assessments and preparing your evidence?
My understanding is there's going to be no operational lighting, therefore there was no assessment of lighting.
Yeah, same here. When I saw your list this morning, madam, I went to the design and access statement, which I can't remember where it is now, but that's clear that there's no operational lighting.
So any lighting would just be emergency lighting, would it?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, not so quick to answer. Between you, there is a difference over cumulative effects for for the development. Mr. Lever, would you like to start by explaining your position?
Yes, I mean this is a landscape with a lot of energy infrastructure development in it. Most of it renewable. There's also a substation as well, and this would be, you know, this scheme represents a sort of filling in of the remaining bits of rural landscape with more energy infrastructure, and I think there's a cumulative effect on that for people moving around the landscape. I think the other thing to say is that this is a very different type of not very different, but it's a different type of development. It's got different characteristics to the solar farms that are sort of common in the area on the plateau top here. You know, they have a uniformity about them, and you know, whereas they appear somewhat out of place. I mean, they are, you know, they look similar. There's not a start again. So what I think what would happen with this is that, you know, although the BESS has a function related to energy infrastructure, it is very different, and it would be jarring within a landscape that's already got a lot of energy infrastructure development in it. You're introducing a different form of infrastructure, different form of development. My proof of evidence, paragraph 3.1.7, I quote the GLVIA 3, which talks about the different forms that cumulative impacts can take, and those are two that very much fit into that.
Yeah, first I'd like to just point out that on our Statement of Common Ground Areas of Agreement 2.6, the proposed development would result in limited additional cumulative effect. And I think that's quite pertinent, because when you look at this figure 13, which is CD, it's a different number, is it 165?
Just bear with.
Yes, CD 165, figure 13. And there's basically a plan of consented or operational development, which is indeed the solar farms. And in plan, it looks quite, you know, there's quite marked areas of the development, but what we have to consider is the additional effect of this development. And in some ways you have to accept that, sorry, I shouldn't say accept, a reason for choice of site was the proximity to the existing solar farms as a development, and that was very much tied in with the locational guidance about context. I think I understand that some of the other BES sites that were refused, for example, even the Pound Farm one, you can actually see there it's on quite a spur and a limb that's quite physically and visually separate from the existing area of solar energy. This one is very much tied into that sort of elbow, for want of a better word, made by the solar farm. And so there are some cumulative effects. We have appraised that in the evidence, but that these will be localised in that area. So you are getting, for example, views within that area where you might have a foreground with solar panels in it, or you might be walking along and have solar panels on one side and the proposed development on the other side. But that's from quite limited, extensive areas. So whilst you might be walking around the landscape and see a lot more solar wind energy, it's about the addition of this development to that, and that the the appraisal is saying that that's quite limited to that one area. It's not adding to that overall combined effect, it's an additional effect. So I think that's just worth bearing in mind when we talk about cumulative effect.
Thank you. So, Ms Fletcher, you took me to paragraph 2.6 quite rightly of what was agreed. So can you explain to me what the last part of the box of the disagreements is about then?
Apologies, ma'am. It's basically just reiterating that it's limited additional cumulative effects. And the basis on which those cumulative effects are identified. I felt that the comments in Mr. Lever's evidence were talking about you would be walking through the landscape and you would see multiple developments, but there was no sort of identification of what landscape are you talking about, what are the parameters of that landscape. And so it was, they seemed the basis on which those opinions in his proposed development, the basis on which those statements were made in his proof of evidence were difficult to understand in terms of how those cumulative effects were coming about.
Yes, thank you, Madam. There's a few points there. I think going back to limited cumulative effects, I think we agree they are limited. I mean, I assess them as moderate, minor, adverse, so they're still adverse effects. In terms of moving through the landscape, whether that's walking or driving through that area of plateau landscape, if you like, between Raymond's Hill and the edge of the Raymond's Hill to the south and the edge of the plateau to the north. So taking in Sector Lane and there's the bridle ways that run north and south of the site. They're on figure 4 of the LVIA. I mean, one is moving through a landscape where energy infrastructures is already very noticeable and prominent in the landscape, and that this development would become apparent as one moves through the landscape. I mean, particularly on we talked about the permissive path again. Potentially from Sector Lane in between the trees, you'd see the top of the transformer. If you were to go on the permissive path between the two bridleways that it connects, I mean, at the moment you walk through a solar farm on two sides, and then you've got a solar farm on one side and open fields. And when it's not foggy, which is not very often in that part of the country, there's views out towards the coast. But certainly there's no more hills to see, no more landscape to see, and that would be filled with this development. So in terms of what I meant, it was walking and driving through this plateau landscape and being aware of it. I mean, it's not a these aren't part of national trails. So the people who walk and move around this landscape are people who live here, and they're doing it sort of every week and every day. So that they're very much aware of the developments that are happening there, and will be very much aware of this new development were it to go ahead.
Could I just pick up on a point there, please? It was just in relation to Mr. Lever's comment about the solar energy being prominent in the landscape. That seems to contradict your earlier discussion about the fact that they are quite recessive and part of the character and don't appear quite so prominent, quite so visible in the landscape. So it seems to be a bit of a sort of difference.
I think it's also worth noting as well, Madam, that the plan that you were directed towards, the access and recreation plan, is actually really useful for understanding what's available in the locality. The Monarch's Way promoted route is over in the national landscape to the southeast of the site, well, east, and then it goes southeast and northeast. And none of those routes are places from which the Rule 6 party has identified there would be any significant adverse visual effect. In fact, the worst case scenario is the permissive footpath next to it, and that's a moderate effect. That's the highest it gets.
I mean, we're talking about sequential cumulative effects, not individual viewpoints. So it is as one walks, as one goes through the landscape. And I think, you know, when we were talking before about solar farms and the difference between solar farms and BESS development, and you know, solar farms have, as I say, this sort of agricultural fencing. There's grass cover. Underneath, the units tend to be about 3 meters, 3.5 meters high, something like that. So this is a bigger development altogether. So there is a difference between them. But there's no denying that as you walk down Sector Lane or as you walk through these bridleways, you know, you're walking next to solar farms and they are apparent. You do see that they're there.
Yeah, and again, you're walking past these solar farms, but there are several fields, and so it's taller and it's a different type of development. I grant you that, but it's not necessarily bigger in footprint. In fact, it's smaller in footprint than many of the solar farms. Just to clarify that point.
Okay, shall we move on to the Devon Landscape Policy Group Advice Note 2? Ms Fletcher, do you want to lead on this? You make particular reference to 2 aspects of this.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting piece of guidance and advice from the group, and I understand it's tied obviously to Devon, so the Dorset National Landscape weren't involved in it, but some of the Devon National Landscape partnerships were part of the steering group, as were the Devon County Council and East Devon District Council on the steering group. And it's very much about saying it's about, if we have this development, where is the best possible place to put it? It's the appropriate development in the appropriate place. And they give guidance on a range of renewable energy, solar, wind, and including BESS. And it wasn't something that was picked up for the original LVA, because I think at that time it was sort of 10 years out of date. So it felt it, and I'm not sure, I don't think it was picked up on that basis, but revisiting it, it's interesting in that it's looking at it and finding this appropriate place, and many of the issues raised, in particular in relation to the siting of BESS, does reflect the landscape characteristics of the upland planned plateau character type, in terms of the larger scale, directing it to larger scale, directing it to upper areas where there is a woodland structure, so not open skylines. And up on upper areas, you would be looking across or up to it. You wouldn't be looking down and across and into a compound, for example. It talks about the scale of development, you know, trying to keep things within a single unit rather than extending over several fields. It talks about the orientation of development and, you know, looking at existing character about retaining as much as possible the existing important field boundaries, which for the most part this development does, with the exceptions that we've already talked about. And also reinforcing that existing character, recognising that there is ash dieback in places as well. So a lot of those siting and design aspects, I would say that the development very much strongly contributes to the compliance with that advice provided.
You've gone through every single bit in your appendix.
Yeah, I've gone through all the criteria listed, and I've provided a sort of resume of where I feel it's either compliant or partially compliant. But it does sort the narrative provided does provide quite a strong argument for compliance.
Yeah, I mean, this guidance, I think, was published in July last year, so it is fairly recent. I mean, the site and this development, I mean, they're not a perfect fit into what are described as lower sensitivity landscapes. I mean, just going, it's CD 1014 is the part F of this, which is about landscape sensitivity, and it starts on BESS and solar PV, which it tends to treat the same. On page 8 of that, and it talks about landform, and obviously this is on an upland plateau, but this is also part of a skyline, an undeveloped skyline, and in terms of land in terms of land cover, which going on to page 9, it talks about higher sensitivity is going to be somewhere with a variety of land cover, which the area around the site obviously has with pasture and woodland and hedgerows, and it says that it talks about historic landscape types. Devon has quite a good historic landscape characterisation mapping, and it's likely that these fields were based on medieval fields, and they've got a higher sensitivity. And small scale, intricate land cover patterns, so small scale fields have got a higher sensitivity. And while this isn't that, it's certainly not, large scale urban environment, and they're not really large scale fields. And then it goes on to landscape context on page 10. And it says that the areas that are likely to be a higher sensitivity are, this is talking about landscape character types. It's very much based on that, not character areas. But it says landscape character types which are small in extent, which this upland plateau is. And in perceptual qualities, it talks about landscapes which are perceived to be remote and tranquil, which I believe this is, and Miss Fletcher doesn't. And it talks about landscapes which feel strongly rural, which this does as being of higher sensitivity. And in scenic qualities, it says higher sensitivity are landscapes which contribute to the settings of the national park or national landscapes. And this isn't saying that I'm not saying that this is the absolute worst site this could go, but it doesn't fit completely into those lower sensitivity categories.
Is there anything else you need to draw out?
I was just going to follow up on about the medium height and the actual defined series of characteristics for the open inland planned plateau does talk about regular, medium to large scale fields. And that is taken into the locational guidance. So it talks about, or the sensitivity appraisal that talks about, I've lost my thread. It does talk about, you know, the smaller scale fields, but that's not the characteristics we're talking about here. It does recommend looking at larger scale field patterns, and these are larger scale field patterns. It also, the upland inland planned plateau, whilst in the study area it's one type. The reason it's got an X on the end of plateau is that actually if you look at the wider extent of upland inland planned plateau, it extends, there's quite a lot of it to the north, and it's not in the LVA in terms of, I'm not suggesting that there's a lot of it, therefore that makes it all okay. It's just saying that it is a resource that's wider beyond study area, but we've only appraised it obviously in relation to the study and that character type within that study area.
Madam, I'm sure you've seen the assessment that was done as part of Ms Fletcher's rebuttal, where she sets out all of those factors and provides an assessment against it.
Yes, so on that basis, is there anything else on that that you need to add? Mr Lever, is there anything else you'd like?
Just a small thing. Yes, as Ms Fletcher said, that plateau landscape type is throughout Devon, but within the study area, it's quite a small piece. And I think in terms of this site, the site, these are quite small fields, which, you know, obviously we can have a look at on the site visit.
Okay. Duration of effects. Is there much that we need to discuss on this?
I think we're both in agreement that 40 years is a generational period of time. It's a long period, and that's how it's certainly been appraised in the landscape and visual appraisal. It was just making the point that this isn't a housing estate where the idea is permanent. This is, the planning permission would require the decommissioning of the project after 40 years. So, but it has been appraised as long-term in the LVA, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. And the LVA methodology, in terms of the highest importance that's given to highest level of importance that's given to duration, talks about 25 years plus, and this is 40 years. You know, taking it back to the people who live in the local area and who came this morning. I mean, if this is there for 40 years, it'll be there probably for the rest of their lives.
Okay. Similarly, sensitivity of road users. Is there anything that we need to discuss on that point? I think, Ms Fletcher, you pick up on Mr Lever's assessment of the sensitivity of road users, don't you?
Yes, it was just a minor point that in the sensitivity attributed to road users isn't, it's on a sort of sliding scale. So in terms of road users on the, within the national landscape along that section of the B road, they are attributed a higher sensitivity. On sector lane and on the other lanes, that sensitivity is reflective of non-designated landscapes, so it's got a slightly lower sensitivity.
Yes, in terms of the B road, I'm at table 9 of the LVA methodology. I don't know what CD that is. But that talks about visual receptor susceptibility to change, and Table 10 talks about sensitivity. Quite agree with Ms. Fletcher in terms of people travelling on the B road or within the national landscape. I think the difference with lanes like Sector Lane and in much of the Devon countryside is that apparently Devon has more miles of lanes than anywhere else in the country, and a lot of them are used as part of the public footpath network, essentially. So people using those lanes, will be people who are going out for a walk, or people walking in the countryside, taking a notice of the landscape, not just people driving. And that's perhaps why I assigned a higher susceptibility to them.
The LVA on that point does make a distinction between walkers and recreational users and cyclists along the lanes as opposed to drivers. So that distinction is made in the appraisal of effects.
Okay, good. Are there any other main points on your areas of disagreement that you feel you've not had an airing of, or that you think the inspector really hasn't got this?
I think you've done very well, ma'am.
No, I think we've gone through it quite well. Thank you, ma'am.
Agreed.
Right, so I just got a couple of points about the LEMP strategy.
There is a policy point that arises. Obviously, the national landscape and the bit that nips into the site is a valued landscape. I think everyone accepts that. The Rule 6 party hasn't said that the remainder of the site with the main best compound does comprise a valued landscape. I understand that's an agreed point between us, but it has a policy implication, so I'd like that to be confirmed, if I can put that through you.
Okay, say that again.
Outside of the national landscape, in the site, do the Rule 6 party agree that is not a valued landscape?
I must admit, I never picked up that there was an argument that it was.
No, we've not done that assessment. No. Okay.
Okay, we can all stand down on that point now. Okay, let's move on to the LEMP strategy plan. Okay, so I'm not sure whether or not these are just points for you to go away and look at to make sure that we're clear about for when we get to conditions and when we've got the note about the bats, etc. So I was just putting down here that I wasn't clear from looking at all of the notes, and there's quite a few notes on the plan, whether or not bats featured in the ecological input that had gone into the design of this strategy plan. And you don't have to know the answer to that right now. And the other thing that I was just scratching my head over was it says that the permanent water swale should have water retained in it at all times. And I don't know, I could be missing the point completely here, but I want to know before the inquiry's closed that there's no misalignment here with any of the other areas of evidence about water on the site. Is there joined up thinking about this swale and keeping permanent water in here? I just want to know that there's an answer to that. You can, even if you're saying, I've been worrying unnecessarily, that's quite fine. So those were just small points really just to take away and look at, and perhaps they'll come back when we come back to a later conditions session. So, on that note, unless there's anything else that anyone wants to bring up about the landscaping and evidence. Are we happy to close this session then? Thank you both very much. Very well done. Excellent. We are at 10 to 4. Do we need an injection of caffeine before we start on conditions? Okay. Miss Fletcher's going to organise chocolate. Right. How long will that take you? We shall start back. I don't think we're going to take very long. We are just going to do some headliners on the conditions today. So if we come back and we start at 4 o'clock, and then hopefully we can close at 4:30 this afternoon. Okay, we are adjourned until 4. Thank you. Okay, are we ready? So we are going to do conditions now. We'll do this also in a round table format. Everybody just chipping in as and when so that we can make some progress. Okay. So, shall I running through them? So the first one is a standard time limit of 3 years. 3 years for this development. That's all parties are agreed that that's a reasonable time for this development. Yeah. Okay. Then we have the approved drawing list, which is where I picked up on SK01 and SK02. Was I right? Are they SK01 revision F and SK02 revision B? Well, look, it doesn't matter, does it? I mean, this is just highlighting these for now. So they can just go on the list to make sure that we're clear about. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Okay, moving on to condition 3. This is a construction environmental management plan condition. A couple of points that I picked up here. The first one within the condition, there shall be no high frequency audible reversing alarms used on the site. I'm just wondering about how realistic that is, if this is also covering the construction period, because won't some of those reversing alarms be required safety measures or best practice, etc.? I'm just wondering where this has come from.
Looking in that direction.
Yeah. Again, for the purpose of this afternoon, unless you absolutely know the answer, you know, you can just note it and say we'll deal with it later.
I believe it's in our construction sites code of practice, so it's a standard council-wide.
Okay, so can you check that then with, I mean, again, I could be completely wrong, but normally I'm expecting to see that vehicles do have especially where there are possibilities of interaction with the public.
Forgive me, if you're going to have that as a requirement of the condition, you'd need to have a requirement for a banksman.
Good point, well made. Could you have a look at that and as well, because I had thought about that as well earlier. Thank you. Then my second point on this was just really about the organisation of the condition schedule. I didn't know if it might be one of those condition lists that might be good with headings, but it occurred to me that we then have the construction and ecological management plan condition at condition 9, and I just wondered if it made more sense for them to be more dovetailed. Okay, I'll leave that with you to have a look at. Okay, then looking at condition 4, I'm right down at towards the bottom. Prior to the installation of any units, all fire service access arrangements, hard standings, hydrants, fire water supplies, firefighting facilities detailed in the approved ERP shall be constructed and installed in full. These facilities shall be retained and maintained for the lifetime of the development. So, just being picky here, retained and maintained. Does that ensure that they are maintained in working order, or does maintain just mean I've kept it?
I think, from my perspective, that's what retained is seeking to achieve in that condition. Maintained must mean something else if it's not to be tautologous. So I think maintained would be in good working order, but that could be added for clarity if it's helpful.
Then on condition 5, criterion E, wording, the proper function of, do we think that's good wording for a planning condition?
So that's something a teenager would write. To secure the proper functioning of the surface water drainage, I think that probably reads, doesn't it? I'm mindful that these are obviously the council's conditions that they've proposed, and they're the custodians of them. But just so we work out what happens now, would you like us to amend them and send back following the discussions today? It's just so that we don't have lots of different documents crossing over. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for taking the lead on that. Condition 6 is where I picked up on the criterion F and the swale and attenuation basin and the permanent standing water. So that just wants dovetailing with checking about the swale. and then okay, criterion H, the reason I asked earlier about the assessment of lighting effects was because this criterion says external lighting shall be designed to minimise light spill and adverse impact on dark skies, bat foraging, etc., which, whilst quite well worded, to my mind, it tells me that it's okay to have lighting on the site if it does these things. So I would like this condition to be otherwise worded, because we've said no lighting except for emergency lighting. Then on criterion I, we've got a good soil resources plan condition. My question is just, is it relevant and appropriate for the site and the development that we're looking at? If you could just have a look at the criteria that are there. I don't know, it may well be that you say that doing all of this with stockpiling and moving soil around, etc., won't have any impacts on permeability or any of the other assessments and judgments that are made in other evidence. But I just want to be sure that we've thought about it. Sorry, I'm looking at condition 12 and the reason for the battery safety management plan and the requirements about any changes to the approved BESS units. And I'm just wondering, because the reason says that the battery safety standards document September 23 is in outline form.
Do you want to?
A standard condition we usually see on the battery safety management plan is an annual update to that report that falls within 28 days of the permission date. So it just gives you a little bit more control over the safety. So it's a safety on a year by year rather than, I think one of the questions was, you know, how can we provide safety over that 40-year period? This is one of those examples where we can update that report once a year.
Okay, do you want to look at replacing this one with something like that?
Yeah. And I think it needs to be tighter anyway, because at the moment it just says you can change the thing with just simple written approval of the local authority. So I think it probably has to be a bit clearer as to what's expected and why. But we'll have a look at that and we'll provide some more wording to both the council and the Rule 6.
Okay, then condition 14 is about the acoustic fence, and it's required to be maintained and retained in an effective condition for the lifetime of the development. I was just wondering why there weren't any specifics about noise limits. This must have come from the noise assessment, and it must be a mitigation proposal that is based on specific outcomes. Just, well, I had two concerns about retained in an effective condition. One was the lack of clear noise limits, and then the other one is that this acoustic fence, the condition refers to appearance and noise. So what's an effective condition? Is it something that just looks okay, or it's just getting a little bit muddled and not specific enough? I think a poor magistrate wouldn't know what to do, would they?
I think probably we need to refer to the assessment that sits behind that, the noise impact assessment from May 2024, and link it back to that and the relevant noise standards, and just tighten the condition up. And it may well be that we separate that out into either an A or and B, or two different conditions, one dealing with the appearance, one dealing with its acoustic qualities, yeah.
Okay, those are all the points that came through from my first reading on it. Is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up at this stage?
Thank you. That was very helpful as a starter for 10, and we'll go through them with a fine-tooth comb. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I clarify on the permissive path that we were talking about earlier? Can you think about whether or not there was anything more that was to be done on the landscaping on that, or not? I'm not going to put words in your mouths, but can you?
Yeah, we will. My assumption, having seen it very recently, is that the ownership boundary goes right through the middle, because the treatment is different on both sides of the hedge. So I think that's a fairly good indication that there's two different landowners doing two different things. And you will see on your site visit, you may have observed it yesterday, that solar side is shooting up quite rapidly. There's quite significant growth, whereas it's been maintained on potential best side. So we can have a think about that, and I think that's probably something that could be secured additionally, insofar as it's within the landowner's control to allow that to grow out, essentially. I think that would be the answer, but I'll take instructions on that and let you know.
I've got a meeting with the landscape officer from East Devon on something else anyway next week. I'll talk to him about what the LEMP on the other site says in detail, but it looks like it doesn't cover that hedge. It feels like it's just fallen between the two. But I'll see if there's anything that's that's included in that, but I think it doesn't sound as though anything's happening with it.
Thank you, that's helpful. Okay, does that complete everything? Okay, so now we just got a little bit of housekeeping so that we can get out by 4:30. So what do I have to remember not to forget? We've got a BAT note.
I think our colleges, we made inquiries in the mid-afternoon break that we had about half an hour ago. Our colleges wasn't online at the time, was he? So I think we're hoping that we can get hold of him. He's working tomorrow, so if we can't get hold of him by the end of today, we'll certainly make sure that we have an update for you first thing. But we want to get that sorted as soon as possible.
Don't worry, I think we're going to have our minds full of battery safety tomorrow. We just don't need to forget it, that's all. That's great. Similarly with our note about our mystery predator. And are there any other action points that I had?
I spoke to the appeals officer in the break as well. What he's going to do is, because initially the core documents had the opening statements on them, what he's going to do is he's going to clear those off the core documents list, because that isn't normal, and make sure that that's all part of the inquiry documents. And so he'll provide you with an updated paper copy of the core documents list tomorrow, so you'll have that.
Good, okay, thank you. That does remind me, so when we have witnesses called, could advocates please give me a nice little list of core documents that you're going to be taking us to during the course of the examination? And there was another point which has just escaped me for now. I think that was the main thing that I needed for us. Okay, that's good. So are we all happy we've completed today's proceedings? Good. I think might be in for a longer day tomorrow. So let's adjourn at 4:25 this afternoon, and I'll see you all in the morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you everybody for all your help.